There can be few cars that make it from the concept stage to production without very little changing on that original design, and yet that's precisely what's happened with the first generation Audi TT. Let's go back to 1995, in fact, the Frankfurt Motor Show. It was very well received, and I guess me, like a lot of people, was probably sceptical it would ever make it into production looking the way it did. Legislation, accountants didn't get involved, and actually the styling that you see is largely the concept version that we saw in 1995. It's a very curvaceous shape, and therefore it wouldn't have been to everyone's taste at the time, and yet I think it's aged really well. Remember, this is now over a 20-year-old design, and yet I think its elegant proportions have really aged well, and it's something to do with the simplicity, the clarity of that design. This lovely curved clamshell bonnet going to a nice definitive A-pillar that arcs gracefully up down to the rear haunches, where there's a neat little boot spoiler and a similarly curvaceous tail, which is very symmetrical to the front end. So you've got these lovely flush fitting headlights and similarly flush fitting tail lights at the back. There's not a lot of clutter in that side visual there. Nice deep sculpted doors with no sort of messy swage lines or anything like that, and big 18-inch alloys that really fill the wheel arches. When the car was finally unveiled in 1999, it was introduced with just two engines, both 1.8 turbocharged. The 180 brake horsepower we got here, and a 225 brake horsepower version. A couple of years later, the Roadster was introduced, and there was also then the 3.2 V6. There was also a lower powered 150 version that was introduced, and front wheel drive only. I wouldn't go for that one personally. I think there's plenty of the Quattro versions. I'd also personally stay away from the V6. I don't think it offers that much extra power compared to the 225, and certainly in everyday conditions on UK roads, I'm not sure it makes a jot of difference. Personally, I'd go for the 180 as I have done here, because you generally get a tidier example for your money. They've not been bashed, thrashed or modified in the way that quite a few of the 225 examples have. They just tend to be more cared for. The 180 engine is also used quite widely across the Volkswagen group, so you'll see it in Golfs and Passats, Seat Leon, Skoda Octavias and many more cars besides. It's a really dependable engine. Just keep on top of that maintenance and this engine will last you a very long time. The car is largely based on the Mark IV Golf platform, which many would have said was a reason to criticise the car when it was launched, and yet bizarrely I think the Mark IV underpinnings are what make the Audi TT actually a fantastic car to buy today, because actually it's those dependable underpinnings that give it, I think, a tremendous balance between a nice ride and actually decent handling and road holding. The Mark I Audi TT is mostly aluminium, so rust isn't an issue. This is obviously a 17-year-old example. There is no visible signs of rust. What you will tend to find is things like misted up headlights, a bit of stone chip damage, maybe the odd scratch here and there which might be subject to a smart repair, and alloy wheels do get a bit of a beating, lots of curbing and things like that, being so big and prominent. This one's even got special Michelin tyres with the protective beading around them. It hasn't worked, I can tell you. Whoever's had this car before had a love affair with curbs. Well, that's enough of the exterior. Let's take a look inside. I think the interior of the Audi TT is an absolute triumph. Very much like the outside, the interior is an absolute masterclass in simplicity, clarity, and yet some lovely attention to detail. It all starts really with this simple, sporty 3-spoke steering wheel with the sort of dimpled aluminium trim round the badge. You've got these two large clear dials for the rev counter and the speedometer. Lovely clear, easy to read graphics and these little neat trim details. And then in the middle there's a little digital information pack for the sort of information that's available on the trip computer. And actually, bizarrely, that's the fly in the ointment for the Audi TT, because that digital information pack, basically it's known to pixelate, and then the information within is really hard to read. There are specialists that can basically take your faulty instrument binnacle, you send it away to them, and then they send you a refurbished one back, and I think it cost about £200. The rest of the fascia really simple and uncluttered, soft touch materials, really well screwed together. I like the sort of aluminium fascia plate here that conceals a tape cassette player. Not that I've got any cassettes, you understand. The cabin is a nice place to be aesthetically, but it's also easy to use and very comfortable. But anyway, that's enough of the interior and the exterior. Why don't we get out on the road and see what it's like to drive. Not long after launch in 1999, there were stories of high-speed instability, a few kind of questionable accidents that seem to have happened because the car wasn't very stable. It led Audi to sort of hastily introduce a boot spoiler. I'm not convinced that the spoiler actually does all of that anyway, and I'm pretty much convinced that those stories that you hear are largely down to people overestimating the ability of all-wheel drive. And if you do go into a corner too quickly and you brake in a bit of a panic mid-corner, four-wheel drive or not, it's going to bite you back. And there'll be many that sort of criticise the Audi TT's slightly sort of average ride and handling, but I like its balance between a reasonable ride, decent handling. The controls are all reasonable. This is the benefit of it being based on a Mark IV Golf. It gives it easy to use controls, well weighted steering, excellent gear change, a lovely balance of ride and handling. If it's just a motorway journey, it's fine. If you want to poodle to town, you'll still have a nice time. And if you want to have a bit of a hack down a B road, it will still deliver that as well. I'd snap one up now if you really want one. You won't regret it.